Hello everyone, my name is Darren Allen and I'm a partner at Shoesmiths. Welcome to our second podcast in our 8 series of podcasts about compliance and risk management. We've been exploring various aspects of compliance and risk, and today we'll be looking at governance and what good governance looks like. I'm delighted to be joined today by my colleague Rebecca Copcutt, who is a director at Shoesmiths. So why have we launched our compliance and risk proposition? Well, in our recent litigation risk survey of 360 GCs and senior lawyers within large businesses, 50% of respondents stated that they had been involved in regulatory disputes in the last 12 months, making it their most commonly occurring type of dispute. The increasing complexity of managing compliance across areas such as financial services, data and privacy, ESG, competition, employment, and consumer protection means that it's never been more critical to adopt a strategic approach to managing risk. So in response, Shoesmiths has launched a compliance and risk offering, which looks to provide clients with assistance around the regulatory cycle. So, Rebecca, why is corporate governance so important?
While a session about good governance appears at first blush to be most relevant to boards of directors and chairpersons, my experience over the years is that good corporate governance is ultimately a shared obligation between multiple departments within an organisation. So while the ultimate responsibility lies with the chair and the board, the listeners here in human resources, finance, procurement, and of course legal counsel and compliance typically have major roles in supporting strong corporate governance. And so they would do well to listen to what we cover today. Darren, as you know, corporate corruption and scandals are nothing new, whether we look back to the fall of the Medici Empire back in the 15th century, to the collapse of Enron or the Volkswagen emissions scandal, Tesco's recent accounting issues, or Glencore's systemic bribery and corruption issues. Corporations have often had to be dealing with rogue directors or sloppy controls, and corporate implosion features regularly in the business world. But in recent years, with increased regulatory expectations and responsibilities, the rise in ESG, much stricter corporate criminal liability legislation, and the ease with which corporate shortcomings can be exposed by company insiders and others on digital media means that corporate decision makers should really be focused on this topic like never before.
It's true to say, almost every investigation that I've been involved in, there's a whole raft of reasons why an issue has occurred, but often one of the root causes is a failure of good governance. And I guess, on a session like this, it'd be useful for listeners to really consider what questions they should be asking themselves when looking at what good governance looks like. And what's your view on that?
Good governance is one of those things which is hard to pinpoint to one particular thing, and it ends up being a mixture of various issues. But time and time again, I think I come back to thinking about good culture.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point. Actually, you can tell when you go into a business if there isn't a good culture in place. There's a blame culture. That's often the start of many of these issues because people, for example, won't want to blow the whistle. There's no kind of speak up culture in place, and that's often a huge issue within businesses.
Yeah, I've seen that too over the years, and most of the times I think people find it difficult to speak up or to raise issues, might not only be because of culture, but also because there is a different way or perhaps a challenged way of keeping documents secure, information passing between senior management and boards of directors isn't clear or regular enough, or perhaps that senior leadership committee aren't as well respected as they should be by the board. So thinking about things like what kind of culture is operating and to the extent to which senior management are listened to by the board is really important.
Yeah, and it's easy to think that this is just a board issue. It is important actually to have a fully functioning, effective board. So, and by that I mean you've got an executive that provides necessary information to the non-execs, and the non-execs are constructively challenging and ensuring that the culture is permeates throughout the organisation. But actually, it's more than that. It's the way in which the risk management processes and the whole organisation of the business is cascaded down throughout. It's very easy to have a tone from the top, but it needs to flow through the entire business.
I agree. And I think also important for organisations to be conscious of how they reflect upon how decisions are made and whether they're able to learn lessons and employ remediation techniques or different ways of doing things once they have been able to assess any particular governance issues to make sure that they don't come to the fore again.
Yeah. It's important also, I think, to have whilst looking at the board structure, it's also important to have a diverse board that with the relevant skills, particularly with the increasing focus on technology. The board members need to understand the business and the intricacies of the business. We've seen a number of investigations where board members simply didn't understand particular products or particular processes, and that in itself led to the issues arising.
Yeah, a diverse board is crucial, and so is a board that feels comfortable being challenged. Are the non-executive directors constructively challenging the boards, and are the boards responding well?
Yeah, I think it's also important when looking at the further down the business is how good behaviour is rewarded, and the response to poor behaviour. You often find that again issues arise in firms where poor behaviour is not dealt with effectively because the person's an effective marketing person, for example, or is important to the business, and that sends the wrong signal within the business itself. So how the business structures its appraisal process and its reward structure is so important to ensuring that culture is effective.
And you have to be able to arm your employees with the skills that they need to govern well. So questions like, are your employees being trained well enough? Are they being assessed well enough? Is the evaluation, as you say, the appraisal and evaluation process working well?
Yeah. So I suppose that leads us on to the question of how companies can test its governance structures. Of course, it has an internal process. So the second line of defence will look at policies and procedures, and the third line of defence will undertake a review from an internal audit perspective. But what's your views on testing?
I think it's an essential part of good governance. I mean, really, this is what corporate governance comes down to. If it's done well, a board is able to best protect the company against any uncertainties that it might have for the future. It can safeguard it against any negative business forces and frankly stay competitive. You can empower your employees and offer accountability in ways that will mean the business can thrive as it goes forward.
Yeah, it's really interesting. In the financial services sector, there's been a real focus on governance in recent years. The PRA issued a letter at the beginning of the year talking about good governance, and a lot of those businesses have for some time have been asking external third parties to come in and do a review of their of the effectiveness of the board, and others have gone wider and looked at good governance across the piece. Looking at internal processes and procedures. And I can only think that this will become more and more important for all businesses, because I think there's a realization that issues just don't arise in the ether. They arise because of, very often, as I said at the start, poor culture and poor governance.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I think gone are the days where your lenders or your investors or your commercial partners or what have you will not be asking questions about the way that your organisation is governed. I think the high standards are par for the course now, and so whether that is shown through your documentation or through your training program or your policies or procedures or what have you, it is now really time for organisations to live and breathe good corporate governance.
Yeah, I suspect that this is an issue that will be looking at for many years to come, given the number of fines, the number of scandals that arise in part because of poor governance. So I think we might be busy for some years to come. I think that's all we've got time for today. Rebecca, thank you very much for joining me. It's been a very interesting conversation on a subject that we know very, very well from the investigations that we've been involved in. And I think we will continue to look at issues relating to governance and culture for many years to come. For our listeners, if you want to find out more, please visit our website where you can learn more about our compliance offering and you can listen to each podcast in this series. Thank you very much for listening.